Yeah, I think we can go ahead and get started. I'm Becky Stern. I'm with Common Cause New York. For the press that's on the call, if anyone has any questions while it's happening, please drop it into the chat with both your name and your outlet, and we will get to it at the end. Let me see if there's any folks on the phone. No, I don't believe, so never mind. I'm going to kick it over to Susan Lerner from Common Cause.
Okay, thanks, Becky. Good afternoon. I'm Susan Lerner, the Executive Director of Common Cause New York. I'm pleased to be joined by Senators Jessica Ramos, Alessandra Biaggi, Robert Jackson, as well as Assembly members aravellasimotas and Carmen De La Rosa. They have all introduced important legislation related to the COVID-19 crisis, which they will talk more about in a moment. The 213 members of the New York State Legislature last met remotely in March. A lot has happened since then in our state, but nevertheless, New Yorkers continue to be without Democratic representation in state government, leaving Governor Cuomo to essentially govern by executive order and sign sweeping temporary changes into law. And while he is correctly triaging the current state of emergency, he's also changed 262 laws in 55 days, according to Monday's Albany Times-Union. This is not how the policy-making process works in a representative democracy. New Yorkers elected their state senators and assembly members from 62 counties to represent 19 million interests, issues, and points of view. Yes, we've heard that lawmakers are busy dealing with constituents' issues. That's true, and it's important. Senator Ramos, for example, represents one of the hardest hit communities in the country. She's been running a food pantry from her district office and delivering hot meals to constituents daily. That's why she's eager to get back to work making laws, so she can apply her on-the-ground experience to the process of running the state with the legislature as a co-equal branch of government, facing the crisis and planning for the future. Nothing about the situation is ideal, but democracy does not pause, it adapts. Just yesterday, the New York City Council held a public hearing remotely on the capital budget, the latest of several it's had since going virtual 2 weeks ago. That's why we expect our state lawmakers to be doing exactly the same. Just like the largest school system in the country and hundreds of service providers, organizations, corporations, and nonprofits across New York that have adapted to work remotely. Public service is a matter of moral leadership. Legislators need to resume remote session to do their jobs making laws. And now we'll hear from Senator Jessica Ramos. Senator Ramos.
Hi, Susan. Thank you so much for kicking us off today. I can't tell you how happy I am to be participating with Common Cause this afternoon and to see so many of my colleagues who I'd love to hug if we could. But I am starting to see much more of them frequently, which is helpful. In the Senate, we've been operating in working groups trying to figure out solutions to bigger issues like housing and generating revenue that we know our state needs. However, it's become increasingly frustrating that we are not officially back into session, that we haven't been called into a remote session, which we authorized by vote at the beginning of the budget process in late March. The critical point here for me is that there are holes in the law that need to be fixed. And to me, passing laws is not only our job as legislators, but a very powerful tool because we represent the voice of the people to put pressure on the governor to do the right thing. Look, we know executive orders are the fastest way to change policy and hopefully for the better. But it's critical that this balance of power with the legislature really is respected. And just yesterday, if I'm not mistaken, during his briefing, the governor explained how dire it was for Washington's legislators to work together in order to put forth proposals for the president to consider. And here we are trying to do that exact same thing. there are small holes in the law that can be fixed as soon as possible. And I want to start by talking a little bit about my own bills, and then I'm going to get into a few of the bills that I think my colleagues have introduced that, if we pass them as soon as possible, would really bring real relief to real New Yorkers who are hurting throughout this crisis. So first and foremost, I want to thank my colleague, Carmen De La Rosa, who I see is here from Washington Heights. Hello, Carmen, my good friend. She and I have been working very diligently to announce and get co-sponsorship of a worker bailout. Now, both Washington Heights, which she represents, and Jackson Heights, which I represent, have been very, very hard hit by this virus. And unfortunately, because so many people are out of work, they've had a real tough time paying rent and buying food. But we know that not every New Yorker qualifies for unemployment insurance. That's only for people who are working on the books and have an employer. Not everybody qualifies for the pandemic unemployment assistance program. For that, you have to be a freelancer, or you have to be self-employed, or an independent contractor. That leaves way too many cracks. And so what Carmen and I are proposing is that we impose a tax on the increase in interest that billionaires get on their assets every year in order to pay for a small subsidy for these folks who don't qualify for other wage assistance programs. So in essence, we would be taxing billionaires, generating $3 to $5 billion in its first year. And this can be implemented quite quickly because it's based on assessments that already exist. And that would let us give every worker who doesn't qualify for those wage assistance programs $3,300 a month per month for the duration of the pandemic. So that's our big idea that we're pushing. We really believe that it's possible and that it's necessary and that it's smart, given that it's an investment before, hopefully, we are going into full swing. And you know, if you've seen the papers, you've seen that I'm pushing for an expanded definition of essential workers, so more people are covered by the benefits. We are pushing for workers' comp to be considered in COVID cases. We want employers to notify their workers when someone is getting sick or worse, dies on the job. These are critical. But there's other bills. For example, my office is getting a ton of phone calls from people who are penalized for forfeiture days that they have because, and is preventing them from receiving the unemployment insurance that they're duly owed. We want to be able to pass Senator Monica Martinez's bill that allows for these folks to get relief as soon as possible. I know of a woman who hasn't received a check in 10 weeks. She's a single mom. She has a child to feed. It's unconscionable that because of the fake austerity measures of this administration, our agencies continue to be underfunded and do not have the capacity to process the claims of New Yorkers when they need us the most. So I'm going to leave it right there because I can talk about these things forever. But nevertheless, the bottom line here is that we want to get back to work. I enjoy very much being in the district, working with my neighbors, helping them get fresh food. We're doing something on Friday. We're doing something on Saturday. But I was elected to be a legislator. I want to pass laws that help my people as soon as possible. And that's why I'm so proud to stand here with my fellow senators and with our colleagues in the Assembly. Thank you for everything that everyone is doing. Hopefully, we'll be back to work soon.
Thank you, Senator Ramos. And now we're going to hear from Senator Biaggi.
Thank you so much, Senator Ramos. That was excellent, bringing the fire and the heat as always, which is exactly what we need because we are in an unprecedented moment and we need to keep pushing. And to Susan Lerner's point, democracy does not rest. It continues and it must be fought for every single day. So good afternoon to everyone who's joining us. Susan and Common Cause, thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure. You have been more than thoughtful during this entire pandemic and are the driving force for justice. And I am just immensely grateful for all of the things that you've done. I also want to extend my gratitude to all of my colleagues, in addition to Senator Ramos, Senator Robert Jackson, Assemblymember Carmen De La Rosa, and Assemblymember Simotas. It's exciting to be on with all of you, although as Senator Ramos said, I would love to be in person with you, being able to get our legislative work done. I never thought in a million years, and I don't think anybody could have, that we would be in a position where I would literally be begging to do my job, which is where we are at the moment. It is frustrating. It is disheartening. My colleagues and I, as Senator Ramos mentioned, are working nonstop around the clock on the ground to support our districts, whether it has to do with feeding people or making sure that our nursing homes and our hospitals and our essential workers have PPE. But that's only one part of this puzzle, and the puzzle is very large. We must, as the New York State Legislature, both the Senate and the Assembly, provide systemic relief and long-term, not temporary executive order, but long-term solutions for New Yorkers during this time of incredible need. I have said this many times before. I am grateful that we live in New York State at this very moment. I am grateful that we have had a strong hand in this fight with our governor. However, we've got to have legislation and be a co-equal branch of government and do the legislating to make sure that the change that we have to make to protect New Yorkers exists, and that requires us to legislate. More than a month ago, the New York State Legislature passed a resolution to allow the legislature to safely vote remotely during this state of emergency, and we were given the technology for it. So if we were able to vote remotely for the budget, which we did, a massive policy document, which is thousands and thousands of lines, very intricate, takes a lot of attention to detail, a lot of minds in the room, we are able to vote on bills individually remotely. The city council, as you heard from Susan Lerner say, is not only holding hearings remotely, but they're doing their work remotely. Our congressional leaders are voting remotely. At this point, I feel embarrassed, to be honest, to not vote remotely, to not be working remotely. The New York State Legislature is known as this place where, you know, the old boys club has existed, the place that is calcified, the place that people look to and think, oh my goodness, it's never going to change. Well, this is the opportunity to make incredible change, to be flexible, to be nimble, to be with the times. There is no reason why we cannot continue to vote remotely. And it's not for nothing at all. You heard several of the issues that Senator Ramos mentioned. There are a number of important measures and pieces of legislation that desperately need to be passed. I'm incredibly proud of Senator Ramos's legislation to expand essential worker designation to our grocery stores, to our transit workers, our restaurant workers, among many others in the labor force who have been left out of the equation. And we've got to make sure that everyone is not only covered, but protected. That is our job, to protect the well-being, the health, and the safety of all New Yorkers. Since before this pandemic began, I've been fighting alongside 32BJ and Assemblymember Hindman for the rights and protection of essential airport workers. We have seen too many airport workers not only fall ill, but also, unfortunately, pass away as a result of the coronavirus. And so, as we have felt the devastating impact of COVID in New York State and all around the country, it's abundantly clear how important it is to guarantee health coverage for every single person, but especially for those at high risk of exposure on the front lines. And our airport workers are on those front lines. Due to the nature of their work, the airport occupation and the way in which it's set up, during the Ebola crisis, the airport workers, the same airport workers that I'm discussing right now, were only given a mask. We know common sense tells us a mask will not prevent Ebola. Similarly here, Even though a mask can prevent the contraction of COVID-19, many essential workers on the front lines were not given those masks. And even if they were, they do not make enough money to be able to purchase their employer-offered health insurance. And so many individuals are forced to go to work, basically risking their lives, risking their families' lives, risking their neighbors' lives, simply to make sure that ends can meet. This is not the New York that all of us are proud to be part of. In fact, I think that this is the antithesis of that. Last year, I introduced this bill that would give airport workers the right to have health insurance. It's called the Healthy Terminals Act. It would provide tens of thousands of low-income workers who work at JFK, LaGuardia, Stewart International Airport, the ability to purchase and have enough funds to have health insurance, to have access to health insurance. The COVID-19 crisis has revealed urgency across the board. It has shined a light on all of the cracks of every foundation that we thought was under our footing. And now it is our responsibility, and it is the time to be able not only to return to legislate, but to make sure that once we come through this moment, that we are able to have a world that we are not only proud of, but where every single person has access to healthcare, has access to healthy and affordable housing, has access to education and internet and broadband, and the ability to be part of New York and the world in a way that allows them to be successful and healthy and well. And if there is any other state in the United States to do it, it is New York State. So we've got to get back to work to be able to do this. And I'm just grateful to be able to have the chance to share all of that with you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Biaggi. And now we're going to hear from Senator Jackson.
Well, thank you for putting this together, Susan and Common Cause, and to all my colleagues. Good to see all of you. Knowing that, I guess it says that we have to get back to work. And not we have to, we must get back to work. That's how crucial it is. It's like a must, and it must happen now, not a month from now, not 2 months from now. It has to happen now. And those are the questions that I raised, even in our work group in the state Senate. I'm part of the COVID-19 housing work group. And there's a second work group called COVID-19 revenue work group. So I've said, yes, we're discussing, we've had 3 or 4 meetings already. We're gonna have 1 or 2 more. But I said, if we collectively do not move legislation during this emergency to deal with all of the crises that we're dealing with, but before June, all hell is gonna break loose. Because you have millions of people waiting for us to act on their behalf. Now, I understand from a legislative process, like all of my colleagues there, that in order to pass legislation, both the Assembly and Senate have to come together and agree. And the governor has to sign it into law, okay? But that cannot take forever. We've already been in this situation too long. We need to come back in session and address it. Now, yes, is it different now than it was before? Absolutely. But during the past 2 months, we've had the opportunity to perfect our Zoom conferences with 40, 50, 80, 100 people. And obviously, you know, in dealing with it at the time of the moment, are there going to be little tweaks here and there and somebody can't get in? And so, yes, but overall, we have to move forward. And that's what's important. So here's an example. I was on a climate work group discussion yesterday, and someone mentioned that during this meeting that we had, it said, we are in the Hunger Games of the budget process. And listening to the news where some people, whether it was Brooklyn or Queens, the line was like around the corner and 5 blocks over for half a mile, people waiting online to get food. And they showed you one individual had a great box that they had on their line waiting to get some food, and at the end, that individual did not receive any food because food ran out. And they showed a picture, the news, of the great wooden box on the side, I guess, of the road or on the sidewalk. And then someone said regarding the legislature that we must walk and chew gum at the same time. It's imperative that we see some action. And so with me as someone that with like my colleagues, Jessica Ramos and Biaggi, and the two assembly members, Carmen De La Rosa, and I represent all of the 72nd Assembly District. We know what it is. We're in the community every single day. We must get back to work and we must pass these bills. And understanding, Susan, that even if we pass these bills and the governor does not agree, we must pass it regardless whether he agrees or disagrees. Hopefully he will agree with us, and we don't have to get to a situation where if we had the votes, we would have to veto, we'd have to override his veto. So we hope we never get to that place, but we need to move and we need to act right away. And so it's taking, my opinion, us a little bit too long to act. People want to see action. People are hungry. People are losing, at least they feel that they're losing their apartments and their homes. And not only renters, but you have homeowners, the same thing. So I've, even before this, I had put forward a bill where we would tax the wealthiest New Yorkers a little bit of money in order to fund the foundation aid in education, over $4 billion. That has not been acted on as of yet. And obviously I have another bill in the working group as far as using, and de Blasio mentioned it, we put in the bill to use security deposits for partial or all of helping to pay rent. Now, I understand that many groups want to have rent canceled altogether, okay? But what I've said to people is that anyone that has lost their job and cannot afford to pay their rent, communication is very important in the process. So I always recommend you should communicate to your landlord or the agent that, listen, I'm sorry, I can't pay rent because I have lost my job. And if I had it, I would pay it, but right now I don't have it. So I ask you to please consider that. In essence, talk to people. And that's what we need to do. We need to talk to each other as far as the Senate, talking to the Assembly to make sure that we're on the same page and moving forward so there's no hiccups. And then June will come around and people are even more anxious and angry at us for not acting. But a second bill that I introduced was about, the gig workers and making sure that we expand Worker Dignity Act classified as employees, certain workers that are not classified as employees. And in fact, this is needed more so now than ever because people that are not classified as employees are applying for unemployment insurance and they're being denied. And we've brought this to the attention to the governor's office, and then they have to reapply again for the pandemic relief that they're entitled to under unemployment insurance. So people are expecting us to act, and the time to act is now. And so I say to you that someone that has acted in many ways before, standing up by myself if necessary, that's what we have to do. And so I'm hoping that we will come together, both houses of the state legislature and activists and the people pushing together. And the governor hopefully will be there with us, pushing the federal government. And also, if the federal government's not going to act, then we have to then raise it ourselves. And revenue is one of the most important things that we need right now. So I thank you and Carmen Cause and my colleagues for coming together to discuss this amongst ourselves and with other people that we're dealing with. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. And now we're going to hear from Assemblywoman Aravella-Simotas.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you all for Susan, thank you for organizing this. Common Cause has been at the front line to make sure that government works for all New Yorkers for a very, very long time. I'd also like to thank all of my colleagues, Senator Ramos, Senator Biaggi, Senator Jackson, my fellow Assemblywoman, Carmen De La Rosa, for advocating for the right thing. Look, what this pandemic has highlighted is that there are gaping holes in our safety net that we need to repair. Now more than ever, we have to do our job to make sure that those less fortunate and those who cannot afford to live have means and have access to housing, have access to an income, can get by. If we don't do that, this whole crisis is only going to leave us in a very, very bad position moving forward. I'm hearing so many heartbreaking stories of constituents who can't get unemployment. Why? Clearly, you know, it shouldn't have taken a pandemic to contemplate that we should upgrade our electronic systems and make sure that they work so that people can actually apply for unemployment benefits if they should lose their job. Look, we are in a crisis in a moment where we are going to prove that we either can work together to accomplish goals and to move our society forward, or we are going to leave a large section of the population behind. You know, it's interesting. There's so many bills that my colleagues have proposed. Senator Ramos and I, you know, a couple of weeks ago had, during a Facebook Live session, mentioned that hazard pay should be paid to essential workers. We were happy when the governor, you know, a few days later mentioned that during his briefing. But we need to get back to work to make sure that that's a reality. You know, Senator Ramos and I are also working to make sure that people on the front lines, essential workers, don't have to prove in a court of law that they may have contracted COVID-19 because of their work. We have to eliminate that requirement in a court of law so that they can be entitled to workers' comp. We've talked about making sure, Senator Jackson talked about making sure that we have enough revenue this year. We cannot balance this crisis on the back of the working class and the working poor. We need to make sure that those who can afford it pay their fair share. It is time. We cannot get through this crisis without taxing the wealthy and the uber wealthy more. You know, this budget session, I think all of my colleagues on this call voted against certain measures because we did not believe that the budget adequately addressed the immense problems that we are facing as a society. And what is that? We need more money to pay for things. Where are we going to get this money? You know, it only makes common sense that we get it from people who can afford it. You know, another bill that I've introduced with Senator Ramos is a bill regarding stock buybacks. With all of this federal money that's flooding from Washington, we have to make sure that companies that may use this federal stimulus money to do stock buybacks do not get any credits from New York State. Obviously, there's a lot of industries and businesses who are entitled to tax credits in the state. We need to make sure that if a company is using money to buy back their stock, they cannot double dip. They cannot go back and decide to, okay, we're going to use this federal money to line our pockets and to line our executive pockets. Let's do that with New York State as well. We need to make sure that the process is transparent and we prevent things like that. Senator Biaggi mentioned Healthy Terminals Act, so very important. Our airport workers are on the front lines. What we need to make sure is that those most vulnerable in this crisis are getting the most support. This meeting is about getting back to work, and we need to do that because guess what? The governor's not going to do it by executive order. He's not going to do it unless he has legislation in front of him and he is forced to make a decision. And that is why it is crucial that we get back to work. We need to show New Yorkers that we are advocating for them, that we are passing the bills that they are in need for us to pass. We are the ones who are talking to our constituents and know on the front line what everyone's needs are. And if we don't get back to work, we are not going to be able to do the crucial work that we were elected to do, that we get paid to do, and that we have the ability to do now from home. And, you know, I want to say thank you, whoever's listening to me, all the essential workers who are putting their safety on the line so we can stay at home and think about the legislation that we need to pass to help them. And that is our obligation, our requirements. And I am hopeful that we will be meeting, we will have legislative session soon, and not just once. We need to try to make sure that we have as much sessions as possible until the end of this legislative session. Thank you all.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. And now our final speaker will be Assemblywoman Carmen De La Rosa.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you for all the work that Common Cause has been doing in order to make sure, as our colleague said, that democracy is upheld. I want to thank my colleagues, Jessica Ramos, Senator Biaggi, Senator Jackson, which is my senator, and of course, aravellasimotas, my colleague from Queens. I think you've heard from our colleagues across the board why this is so important. I will say that we have been working back home. We really have. We've been delivering for our communities. We've been stepping up to make sure that people have access to food, that people are connected to government in a way that will allow them to pay their bills and to put food on the table. But we were elected to legislate. We were elected to be a balance of power to the executive. And now it's time for us to, as we continue to make sure that our communities rise up from this pandemic, to also put legislation in place that will allow them to do that. As you heard from Senator Ramos, excluded workers, we've introduced legislation around excluded workers. One of the tolls that this pandemic has had on immigrant communities is that many immigrant communities have lost their main breadwinners. And those that are left are now picking up where those family members that have unfortunately passed away left off. They are excluded from many of the supports that the federal government has given, from many of the local supports like food stamps and Medicaid for underlying conditions that may not be COVID related. And we must make sure that those that are most vulnerable have an ability to take care of themselves, of their families, and of their health. We also know that today the governor announced that the moratorium for rents was going to be expanded. But in communities like mine, where the fear of displacement is real, we were already at a critical juncture before the pandemic came. My tenants in my district are severely rent burdened, and that means that they pay more than 50% of their income towards rent. They often have rent arrears already. This pandemic and the expansion of the moratoriums is going to make it so that those rent arrears put them at risk of eviction once the pandemic is over. So the legislature must come back to act to make sure that there is hope for them once the moratoriums are lifted, because our courts will be overwhelmed, our tenants will be put on the line for displacement, and our small businesses will also continue to shutter. And so we've also been talking, and some of you have heard me in the past few days, talking about incarcerated individuals. I sponsor legislation around elder parole and releasing people who have served the majority of their sentences, 15 years plus, who are now dying in state prisons because of COVID-19. And the governor has unfortunately decided to not release as many as are eligible for parole and other early releases. So we must come back to the legislature and pass laws that will create these conditions for our communities to keep striving. I mean, when a mother calls me and says, my son is at Greenhaven, and I have no idea if he's okay, I have no idea if he has COVID, I have no idea if he has access to medical attention, it breaks my heart. And I was elected to lead. I was elected to make sure that we could legislate solutions that our communities bring to us. We also heard and have been hearing about the racial disparities that exist in the Latino and African American communities. We know that those disparities are not coincidence. We know that our health system has also not been able to serve our communities. We have a problem when it comes to access to health. I'm a member of the Mental Health Committee, and one of the issues that I focus on is access to mental health. We must address those issues because the trauma that exists in our communities based on the loss and the grief and the economic pressures that our communities are feeling are real. And, you know, we have legislation such as the New York Health Act, which we've been talking about for years. What difference would it have been if legislation like the New York Health Act would have been enacted already? Many more people would have had access to life-saving preventative care. And that is what we're talking about as the city council in New York goes back into session, as we see that our partners on the federal government end up going back and passing stimulus packages. Where is New York State? Executive orders are great. We all, you know, stand around the television waiting to see what those executive orders are. But I believe that leadership should be proactive. And as leaders who were duly elected in our communities, we must go back to Albany and legislate. And so I stand here hoping that this message will resonate with leadership and others who know that we are ready to go back. I'm gonna just say a few words in Spanish because I know there was some Spanish colleagues from the press that wanted to hear about some of our proposals. Estamos aquí representando comunidades afectadas por el COVID-19 y diciendo que como legisladores nosotros tenemos un deber legislativo de regresar a la legislatura y podemos hacerlo remotamente con la ayuda de la tecnología para asegurarse que problemas en nuestra comunidad, por ejemplo, el problema de los trabajadores excluidos, que como la senadora Ramos dijo, introdujimos una ley para asegurarse que los inmigrantes más vulnerables puedan tener acceso a un ingreso mensual. Leyes como las leyes para los encarcelados, que hay muchas personas en nuestras comunidades que están ahora mismo esperando noticias de sus familiares que están en cárceles a través del estado de Nueva York. Tenemos que asegurar que podemos volver a Albany para eso. A Albany no, a la legislatura. También tenemos leyes para nuestros pequeños negociantes, para los inquilinos. Nosotros tenemos el deber de ser un balance de poder al ejecutivo, al gobernador. Y ese es nuestro derecho y también lo que nuestra comunidad esperan de nosotros. Estamos trabajando todos los días, pero hoy es necesario de que nosotros tenemos un plan para regresar a la legislatura y terminar el trabajo que comenzamos. Gracias.
Thank you all. On behalf of Common Cause New York, your constituents and all New Yorkers, it is really excellent to hear from lawmakers who want to do their jobs and pass laws. And now we're going to open it up for questions and answers.
Yes, I want to reiterate that these questions are for press only. So if you have any questions and you are from press, please write in the chat your name and your outlet, and I can unmute you and you can ask the question. Give folks a few minutes.
While we ask for some questions, can I do my Spanish bit for like a minute? If that's,
yeah, sure.
Maybe we'll get some really interesting.
Sure, it gets people to give some time.
Get their juices flowing. All right. No, pues hoy aquí estamos reunidos para hacernos, estamos aquí reunidos para asegurarnos de que el liderazgo de la legislatura entienda cuán importante es que nosotros como legisladores regresemos a legislar, porque precisamente ese es nuestro oficio, poder pasar leyes que mejoran las políticas públicas y más ahora en este momento de esta pandemia queremos cerrar las brechas y corregir donde la ley nos ha fallado para poder proveerle ayudas a los que más necesitan en este momento. Así que con la asambleísta Carmen De La Rosa hemos introducido un proyecto de ley para ayudarle a aquellos que no califican para otros programas de asistencia salarial, como lo que es el desempleo o el nuevo programa que se diseñó específicamente para esta pandemia. Sabemos que muchos de nuestros vecinos indocumentados o que tal vez trabajan en oficios que no están dentro de los libros, no califican para programas como este, pero más sin embargo tienen que pagar renta y tienen que comprar comida. Así que queremos asegurarnos de que estamos evadiendo un problema mucho más grande al poder proveerle a las personas con el dinero que necesitan para sus necesidades en este momento. Pero para eso necesitamos regresar hacer nuestro trabajo como legisladores y ojalá que sea muy pronto. Gracias.
Thank you. Becky, over to you.
Yeah, I'm going to do questions in the order that they were received. The first person to message me was Anna Gronewold from Politico. So I've unmuted you, Anna, so you should be able to ask your question.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for doing the call. Just wondering what Andrea Stewart-Cousins and Carl Hastie have said when you have asked to come back, and what their reasoning for not calling anyone back remotely is.
I'm happy to jump in. That's fine. So hi, Anna. Nice to hear from you. I can't see you, but I see you from you.
That's on purpose.
I know. I figured it was. I wish I could turn my video off too. So I mean, at least for the Senate side, I'll just speak for the Senate side. I mean, the leader has been incredibly open, and you know, when we concluded for the budget, she made it very clear to us that our business was not over, that we would be back, whatever that meant, whether it was like physically, if it was safe to do so, or virtually. And so I have not heard anything otherwise. I believe that she's committed to doing that. She said that she's committed to doing that. It's not a secret that she's committed to doing that. It's just a matter of, I believe, making sure that we have there are coronavirus bills that every single one of us have or are part of as co-sponsors. A lot of them are new bills. Mine is not a new bill, but a lot of them are new bills. And so vetting those, I mean, in a regular session, you go through a hearing, you go through a lot of conversations, conference discussions, and now we're talking about that times 100-fold. And so it's going to take some time to get these bills in the best place possible. Obviously, nothing is, infallible. And so we want to make sure that we have the best, strongest bills. And that's kind of what we're working through right now. So I do not have a loss of hope or faith that we will not be returning. I believe that the most important thing and the first priority will most likely be the coronavirus package of bills.
Thanks. And from the Assembly side?
I'll take that. You know, Carl and all of my colleagues have been we've been talking about the bills that need to be done, about the gaping holes that many of my colleagues see in the social safety net. I know many of us have been talking in different Zoom conferences and with different activists about what needs to get done. I talk to leadership regularly about the things that I'm seeing on the ground in my district. And I know I talk to my fellow colleagues also on a daily basis to make sure that we are all, and for the most part, all of us are witnessing the same thing. Our constituents need more support. So in terms of timing, I am certain we're going to go back for hearings and then session at some point. In terms of timing, obviously, Speaker Hastie and Leader Cousins have to decide when that would be an appropriate time. As my colleague Senator Biaggi says, normally, passing a piece of comprehensive legislation takes an incredible amount of time, amount of eyes looking at it. But I know that we are talking on a daily basis with leadership, with Programming Council, trying to make sure that we are addressing all of the problems that are before us in our communities.
Thanks. I think if that's everyone, I'm going to jump to Mandy from the Times Union. I don't know if you still have your questions that kind of maybe got answered there, but I'm going to unmute you in case you have a follow-up.
Why not? I'll take the opportunity. Thank you all for being on this call and then setting this up. When it comes to some of the technological difficulties that you all might be running into between the Senate and Assembly, is that an aspect that still needs to be ironed out before coming back for session?
No, I can speak for the Senate and say that we have been using Zoom to communicate in working groups and in conference. We have held conference a few times now. There have not been any technological barriers that I am aware of that would prevent us from carrying on with the regular session schedule and getting things done for New Yorkers.
I agree. Technologically, I don't see any issues. If one particular legislator might have issues with their internet connection, that might be an issue, but for the most part, you're able to communicate either by Zoom, online, by email, by phone. During the budget process, we gave ourselves incredible flexibility to discuss these issues, do technology. I know that every one of my colleagues in the state legislature, or most of us, have tablets that we use to go online if we might not have a computer of our own or access to a computer, because for many of us, we're homeschooling, so our child might be using the computer at the time of our conference. But nonetheless, the technology is there. Really, we need a willingness to get back to work, and it has to be an appropriate time. So, you know, but in an issue with respect to technology, that's not a barrier.
So if technology is not a barrier, and you discuss that, you know, the leaders just need to decide when to come back, are there aspects where you feel like it needs to happen sooner rather than later? Is there legislation that needs to be tackled, you know, immediately?
Yeah, look, like I explained, everybody is having a lot of trouble with the Department of Labor, and there is a particular issue with people who haven't been able to access any of their benefits because they have forfeiture dates. This is a bill that Senator Monica Martinez carries in the Senate. I apologize for not knowing who carries it in the Assembly, but it's an easy fix. It's one of those no-brainer bills that would help so many New Yorkers. The governor's not doing anything about it, so it's our job to make sure that we are. And here we are trying to do our job, but we can't vote for that bill to be you know, considered by the governor for signature unless we do our end of the process. And so that's why we're here. We want to make sure that we are taking advantage of these days that are left according to the official session calendar, and if not, then to extend them until the people's work gets done.
And of course, we at Common Cause have been advocating for temporary fixes for the election law to answer questions and fill in gaps to be sure that the June 23rd primary happens efficiently and safely, and people are not disenfranchised, in addition to the issues that our elected leaders here have been talking about related to the COVID-19 crisis.
If I may just hop in, Susan, you know, New Yorkers must see and believe that their government is working for them, and that can't happen unless we get back to work.
Okay, Bill Mahoney from Politico, who doesn't have a mic on his desktop, and this question you probably guys already have answered, but I think he still wants me to ask, so I will. For the legislators, what have you been told by your leaders when you've asked to come back?
Oh, yeah.
I feel like we might have already touched upon this, but
Yeah.
I think
Yeah, I mean, look, I
answered that in the previous.
I had the conversation with Majority Leader Stewart. Go ahead, Alessandra.
No, I want to just double down on what I said before, just as a reiteration of the fact that we're committed to coming back, and that is clear across the board. There's no doubt in my mind at all.
And
Yeah.
Anna, oh, sorry, go on.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say that my conversations with the leader have been that, you know, she's waiting for us to come to a consensus on the bills that we want to pass through these two working groups that have been created, housing and revenue. My point and why I'm participating in this press conference today is that while we do that work, because it's very valuable and important work, there are a ton of bills that we can be passing right now to help people right now. So that is why we need to go back to work right now.
And if I put in my 2 cents, you know, us meeting in work groups, 3, 4, 5, how many days we meet, that's fine. The people we represent want to see action. They don't want us to say, well, we've been working on it. Well, when are you going to act? That's what they want to know. And I'm raising my voice a little bit because they are the ones that are suffering more so than us. And we as legislators, we're still being paid. And more money than the average New Yorker earns. So come on. Not to say that we don't deserve it. I think we deserve more, but I'm not going to get into that. But they want to see action. And so the Assembly and Senate have to come together and move it forward and talk to the governor. As I said in the beginning, communication up front is very important. So we are getting there. The leader's fully aware of it. She is receiving phone calls from us, texts from us. She's reading the newspapers and blogs and everything else just like we are. And we know that we have to act on this right away. And as Jessica said, there's some that we can act on like right away. And others, once we come together and work with the Assembly with respect to, and especially before June. As I said, we don't act before June on stuff, we're going to be in deep trouble. They're going to be very upset.
So I would just like to say on behalf of New Yorkers that some of these discussions would be beneficial to your constituents, to hear what you're balancing, to understand the challenges of dealing with this crisis. But that's something we at Common Cause have been talking about for a while, so we'll turn it over to the next question.
Yeah, I just know that Anna Gronewold has a follow-up. So Anna, I'm going to unmute you.
Thanks. Yeah, I was wondering about the budget cuts that the DOB released earlier or last month, I believe. There weren't details there, but I know they said that the details of about $10 billion in spending will be released mid-May. And then it's my understanding that the legislature can come up with a different plan if you guys aren't on board with what DOB says. Is that part of the conversation right now? And is that something that is feasible for you to do?
Well, I just think that that I'm sure is being discussed in the revenue work group. But I say that based on the preliminary assessments that say X amount of money is going to be cut out of education and healthcare and localities, I think that obviously everyone is looking at that and assessing, you know, aid to localities, talking about fire, police, and stuff like that. And then when you talk about healthcare, in my opinion, no cuts at all should be even considered for healthcare, especially in this pandemic. I mean, obviously, right now, New York is on a downward curve, but from a national point of view, they say that the daily death toll is going up. We don't need to cut in healthcare right now, and especially with all of the suffering that everyone has had, and including all of our first line responders, doctors, nurses, people that are cleaning up, and the impact that's having, we definitely don't need to do that. So I just say that. And then when it talks about education, obviously, what I say the most important thing that people want is a roof over their head and food in their mouth. Let's talk about the basic fundamentals. And obviously, when people have a roof over their head and food in their mouth, then they can talk about health, they can talk about education, they can talk about, you know, climate justice and everything else. But basically, we're in a situation where the fundamentals are going to have to be considered for the people, and we must be able to act. Even if we have to raise revenue and go to the governor and say, this is what it is, we need it, we ask you to go along with it, and if not, then the people have to act.
That seems to be a very appropriate note on which to end our discussion. And again, I want to thank our elected leaders for joining us today, and hope to see you back in remote session publicly soon. Thank you all so much.
Before you hop off, we also have Romy from Univision who wanted to ask some questions in Spanish.
Ah, please.
Buenas, ¿cómo están? Mis preguntas van a ser para Jessica y Carmen, cualquiera de las dos que pueda responder. Quiero saber, en un momento donde está el déficit financiero del Estado muy alto, ¿de dónde plantean ustedes sacar, que el Estado saque el dinero? Escuché algo sobre imponer impuestos a los ricos, pero también se ha hablado de la urgencia de que el gobierno federal dé más fondos al Estado de Nueva York.
Sí, es correcto. Nosotros como Estado estábamos en un déficit antes de esta pandemia y obviamente esta crisis solo ha hecho un déficit mucho peor. vamos a necesitar dinero para poder reconstruir nuestro sistema de salud público y vamos a necesitar dinero para poder ayudarle a las personas a cubrir sus necesidades. Sabemos que la clase trabajadora no tiene dinero. Las corporaciones y los otros negocios van a necesitar todos sus recursos para poder empezar con toda gana y ojalá nuestra economía no sufrir tanto como lo esperamos. Es por eso que estamos proponiendo este impuesto a los multimillonarios. Hay 112 multimillonarios en el estado de Nueva York, solamente 112. Y para ellos este impuesto sería muy pequeño comparada a toda la fortuna que tienen. Pero esa pequeña contribución ayudaría a miles y miles de neoyorquinos. Es por eso que estamos proponiendo este proyecto de ley y ojalá el gobernador lo considere y lo firme para que así sea lo más pronto posible. De otra forma, la excusa de decir de que no hay dinero es que la verdad entonces no queremos dinero, porque Nueva York es uno de los estados más ricos de todo el país, en donde la desigualdad es más grande. Así que no debemos mentir y decir de que no hay dinero. Sí lo hay, lo necesitamos pasar estas medidas para asegurarnos de que el Estado no llegue a la bancarrota y podamos ayudar a nuestra gente.
Gracias, senadora. También quería añadir que, como dijo la senadora, nosotros como la legislatura estatal tenemos el poder de aumentar los impuestos para asegurar que nuestro Estado tenga el dinero efectivo para poder ayudar a nuestras comunidades. Claro que es importante que el gobierno federal ayude al Estado de Nueva York lo más posible, ya que la pandemia, el epicentro de la pandemia es en nuestras comunidades. Pero además de las responsabilidades federales que existen, además de las responsabilidades federales que existen, nuestra comunidad, nuestro Estado tiene la responsabilidad y tiene la autoridad de asegurarse que aquí haya un ingreso que suba para que los más necesitados puedan tener la ayuda que necesitan en este momento.
Muchas gracias a las dos.
All right then. Barring any other last minute questions, again, I want to thank the electeds for participating and stay safe, everybody, and hope to see you back in remote sessions soon. Take care.
Thanks.